No nanny lasted more than a month in the sterile, echoing halls of the Croft mansion. They fled from the silence, from the heavy blanket of grief that smothered every room, but mostly they fled from the child. Lily Croft, all of 6 years old, was a ghost in her own home, a porcelain doll with vacant blue eyes who had not spoken a word, not shed a tear, not offered a single smile since her mother's death 3 years prior. The official diagnosis was a tapestry of grim terminology: selective mutism, profound developmental trauma, severe attachment disorder. 7 nannies, all armed with impeccable credentials and optimistic smiles, had been broken by the sheer, unbreachable emptiness of the little girl. They would leave defeated, whispering to the agency that the child was a lost cause, a beautiful, empty shell. Julian Croft, one of the richest men in the country, a titan of industry who could bend markets to his will, was powerless against the void in his own daughter. He would watch the nannies leave, his jaw tight, his heart a cold, heavy stone in his chest, and write another check, his vast fortune feeling more like a mockery than a solution. After firing the 7th, he had all but given up hope, resigning himself to a future of silent dinners and the hollow echo of his own footsteps. But then a different kind of applicant appeared at his door, not for the nanny position, but for a simple housekeeping role. Her name was Laura Vance. She was quiet, unassuming, with a sorrow in her eyes that mirrored his own. She carried with her a past steeped in pain, a loss she never spoke of, but which clung to her like a second skin. He hired her because she didn't offer pity or false promises. She just looked at the opulent desolation of his home and seemed to understand. For weeks, she moved through the house like a phantom, polishing surfaces that were already gleaming, her presence a soft, unobtrusive hum. Julian barely noticed her, consumed by his work and his grief. He had instructed the staff to leave Lily to her routines, to not disturb the fragile, silent peace. But Alara watched. She saw things no one else had bothered to see. She saw how Lily's small hands would trace the patterns in the marble floor, how her eyes would follow a dust mote, dancing in a sunbeam. And one afternoon Julian, returning home earlier than usual, was about to retreat to his study when a flicker of movement from the sunroom caught his eye. He walked towards the glass doors, expecting to see the gardener, but the sight that met him froze him in place. Ilara was on the floor, not speaking to Lily, not trying to engage her, but simply sitting near her, meticulously polishing the leaves of a large ficus plant with a soft cloth. And Lily, for the first time in 3 years, was not staring into nothingness. Her head was tilted, her gaze fixed on Alara's gentle, rhythmic motions. In her lap her ever-present wooden horse was still, but her fingers were not clenched around it in their usual death grip. They were relaxed. This single quiet moment of shared stillness, this tiny crack in the wall of his daughter's silence, was the beginning of a change that would shatter his world, unearthing a secret so monstrous it would force him to question everything he thought he knew about his life, his wife's death, and the very nature of the child he had almost given up on. Before we continue with this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and like the video. Oh, and don't forget to comment below where you're watching us from. We love to know that. Ilara's first days were a study in observation. She learned the geography of the house not by its floor plan, but by its emotional temperature. The grand foyer was an ice cave of formality. Julian's study was a fortress of solitude, smelling of old leather and bitter coffee. Lily's room, however, was the most complex territory. It was a pristine pastel cage filled with expensive toys that were never touched and books that were never read. Everything was arranged with a precision that bespoke a total lack of childish chaos. The only object that seemed to have a history was a small, worn wooden horse, its paint rubbed away in patches, which Lily carried everywhere. Ilara saw that the horse was more than a toy. It was an anchor. When Lily was startled or when a new person entered the room, her knuckles would turn white as she gripped the small wooden figure. It was her shield against a world she had long ago decided was not safe. Julian Croft remained a distant, formidable presence. He left before dawn and returned long after Lily was in her silent bed. Their interactions were brief, transactional. He would issue instructions through his head of staff, a stern woman named Mrs. Gable, who enforced the house's rigid silence with an iron will. "Mr. Croft prefers his privacy," she had told Alara on her first day. "And as for the child, her routine is not to be disturbed. Her meals are at 8, 12, and 6. Her therapist sees her on Tuesdays and Thursdays. Otherwise, she is to be left in her room or the designated playroom. There is to be no emotional engagement. It has been found to be counterproductive." Alara had simply nodded, her expression unreadable. Counterproductive. The word felt like a shard of glass in her mind. How could a child's very existence be deemed counterproductive to engage with? She performed her duties with a quiet efficiency that pleased Mrs. Gable. She cleaned the cavernous rooms, her movements fluid and silent. But her mind was always working, piecing together the fractured narrative of the Croft family. She saw the portraits of Amelia Croft, Julian's late wife. The woman was beautiful, with a vibrant, joyful smile that seemed to mock the funereal atmosphere of the home she'd left behind. In every photo she radiated a warmth that was now conspicuously, painfully absent. Alara would find herself staring at the portraits, a strange ache of familiarity settling in her chest. Her focus, however, was Lily. While pretending to dust or organize, she conducted her gentle, unobtrusive experiments. She noticed that while Lily ignored the loud, colorful electronic toys, her gaze would linger on natural things, a spider spinning a web outside the window, the way the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the floor, the slow unfurling of a new leaf on a potted orchid in the hallway. These were the things that held her attention. The world of the living, not the world of plastic and batteries. This was her first major clue. The specialists had said Lily was disconnected from all stimuli. They were wrong. She was disconnected from their stimuli. At the far end of the mansion, connected by a long glass corridor, was a conservatory that had fallen into neglect. It was filled with the skeletons of exotic plants, their brittle leaves littering the tiled floor. It was a forgotten place, a tomb of forgotten life. One afternoon, Alara propped the door open, letting the fresh air circulate. She began to clean, clearing away the dead foliage, washing the dusty glass panes until the sun streamed in, bright and unfiltered. She found a few resilient plants still clinging to life in the corners, a tough, spidery aloe, a stubborn fern. She repotted them, her hands moving with a practiced tenderness. She brought in a small bag of soil and a few packets of simple seeds, marigolds, lavender. This greenhouse became her sanctuary within the larger, colder sanctuary of the mansion. She began to hum as she worked. It was an old habit, a subconscious comfort. The tune was simple, a lullaby her own mother had sung to her, a melody tied to a part of her past she kept locked away. It was a sad, sweet song, full of gentle rises and falls. She didn't think anyone could hear her, tucked away in this forgotten corner of the estate. But one day, as she was humming and coaxing a new shoot from the soil, she felt a presence. She turned slowly. Lily was standing in the doorway of the corridor, her small frame silhouetted against the light. She was clutching her wooden horse, her eyes wide, fixed on Alara. She wasn't looking at the plants or the sun or the dirt. She was looking directly at Alara, and she was listening. Alara's breath caught in her throat. She didn't stop humming. She kept the melody soft, steady, weaving it into the quiet air of the greenhouse. Lily took one tentative step inside, then another. She didn't come close, but she stayed, watching, for a full 10 minutes before turning and vanishing as silently as she had appeared. It was the first time Lily had willingly sought out another person's company. Elora felt a tremor of something fierce and protective course through her. It was hope, fragile and terrifying. She had found a key, a tiny musical key, and she had just inserted it into the lock of Lily's silence. The next day, she brought a small, vibrant marigold she had potted into Lily's room and placed it on the window sill. She said nothing, just gave the plant a little water and left. Later that evening, when she came to turn down the girl's bed, she noticed the wooden horse was not in its usual place on the pillow. It was sitting on the nightstand next to the marigold. The greenhouse became their silent meeting place. Elora never pressured Lily to join her. She simply left the door open and went about her work, humming her quiet tune. More often than not, the small girl would appear, a silent observer standing just inside the threshold. Elora learned to sense her presence without turning around, a subtle shift in the air, a feeling of being watched by curious, lonely eyes. The space itself was transforming. What was once a dusty mausoleum was slowly becoming a vibrant sanctuary of green. The air grew thick with the scent of damp earth, lavender, and blooming jasmine. Life was returning to this forgotten room, and Elora prayed it was a metaphor for what could happen to the forgotten child. One Tuesday afternoon, a storm rolled in from the west, the sky turning a bruised purple-gray. The wind howled around the eaves of the mansion, and rain began to lash against the glass panes of the conservatory. Elora was inside, checking on her seedlings, when Lily appeared. The girl seemed more agitated than usual, her grip on the wooden horse so tight her knuckles were like tiny pearls. The therapist had just left, and Elora knew those sessions were always difficult. The therapist, a woman with a strained professional smile, would try to engage Lily with flashcards and puzzles, and Lily would retreat even further into her shell, becoming as rigid and unresponsive as a statue. The storm seemed to mirror the turmoil inside the little girl. Elora sat on a low stool, not looking at Lily, and began to hum her lullaby. The melody was a soft counterpoint to the fury of the storm outside. She focused on pruning a small rose bush, her movements slow and deliberate. Lily crept closer than she ever had before, standing just a few feet behind her. A sudden, violent crack of thunder shook the entire mansion. The lights flickered and died, plunging the greenhouse into a dim, stormy twilight. Lily cried out, a small, sharp gasp of fear. In her shock, her hands flew open, and the worn wooden horse clattered to the stone floor. It was the first time Elora had ever seen her let it go. Both of them froze. The horse lay on its side between them, a fallen soldier. The silence was absolute, broken only by the drumming of rain on the glass roof. Elora didn't move. She waited, holding her breath. She knew this was a critical moment. If she reached for the horse, she would be breaking the unspoken trust they had built. The choice had to be Lily's. Slowly, almost painfully, Lily took a step forward. She knelt down, her eyes still wide with fear from the thunder, and reached a trembling hand for the toy. As her fingers brushed against the worn wood, another sound escaped her lips. It was not a gasp. It was a word, or the ghost of one. A broken, fragile syllable pushed out from a place of deep, forgotten memory. "Ma," she whispered. The sound so quiet it was nearly lost in the storm. Elora's heart stopped. She stared at the back of the little girl's head, at the fine, blonde hair clinging to her small neck. Ma. It was a cry, a question, a memory, all wrapped in one impossible sound. Lily snatched up the horse, clutching it to her chest, and looked up at Elora. Her blue eyes were no longer vacant. They were shimmering with unshed tears, filled with a terrifying, dawning awareness. For the first time, Elora wasn't looking at an empty shell. She was looking at a child, a real feeling, frightened child who had just spoken her first word in 3 years. A wave of emotion so powerful it made Elora dizzy washed over her. grief for the years this child had lost, and a fierce burning hope for the future she might now be able to reclaim. She didn't speak. She simply met Lily's gaze and gave her the smallest, most gentle of smiles. In the dim, storm-lit greenhouse, surrounded by the scent of rain and earth and new life, a bond that had been forming in silence was finally sealed with a sound. The weeks that followed this breakthrough were a delicate dance of progress and secrecy. Elara knew that what she was doing, what Lily was doing, would be seen as a disruption to the carefully managed, sterile environment Mrs. Gable and the team of specialists had constructed. So she kept their secret. The greenhouse became their world. Lily started to follow her there every day, no longer hesitating at the door. She wouldn't speak again, not yet, but the single whispered word had been a key turning a lock deep inside her. The change was subtle, but profound. She began to interact with the world of the greenhouse. She would gently touch a soft, fuzzy leaf of a lamb's ear plant. She would watch, mesmerized, as Elara watered the orchids. One day she picked up a fallen blossom and held it, studying its intricate pattern, a look of intense concentration on her small face. Elara introduced a new element to their time together, drawing. She brought a simple pad of paper and a few charcoal pencils, leaving them on a bench. She never asked Lily to draw. She simply began to sketch the plants herself. She drew the sharp lines of a cactus, the delicate curve of a fern frond, the full bloom of a rose. For days, Lily just watched. Then, one afternoon, while Elara was tending to some seedlings, she saw Lily pick up a piece of charcoal. Her movements were clumsy, her grip awkward, but she began to make marks on the paper. Her first drawings were just chaotic scribbles, dark and angry, but then they began to take shape. She drew a horse, a wobbly stick-figure version of her wooden totem. She drew a house with a storm cloud over it. And then one day she drew two figures. One was small, holding a horse. The other was larger, standing next to a tall, leafy plant with musical notes floating from her mouth. Elara felt a lump form in her throat. Lily was communicating. She was telling her story in the only way she knew how. Julian Croft remained oblivious to the quiet miracle unfolding in his own home. His life was a blur of board meetings, international calls, and the crushing weight of a company that demanded his constant attention. The mansion was just a place he slept. He received the weekly reports from Lily's therapist, dry clinical summaries that noted no significant change in behavior and continued refusal to engage. He would read them, a familiar coldness settling in his gut, and file them away. He saw Elara in passing, a quiet, efficient presence who kept to the background. He had all but forgotten the strange moment in the sunroom, dismissing it as a fluke. His world, however, was about to collide with Lily's. A multi-billion-dollar merger he had been orchestrating for months suddenly hit a snag. A rival corporation had made a last-minute play, and the deal was on the verge of collapse. He spent 2 days in a maelstrom of furious negotiations, barely sleeping, fueled by caffeine and rage. On the 3rd day, the deal fell apart completely. It was a humiliating public defeat. He drove home in a black mood, the city lights blurring through the rain-streaked windows of his car. He wanted nothing more than to pour a stiff drink and retreat into the silence of his study to numb the stinging failure. He stormed into the house, shrugging off the concerned greeting from Mrs. Gable. He was heading for his study when he heard it, a faint sound, almost like a melody, coming from the back of the house. It was a woman's voice, humming. It was followed by something else, a sound so alien in this silent house that it stopped him dead in his tracks, a soft, clear giggle. He frowned, his anger momentarily forgotten, replaced by a sharp, confused curiosity. A giggle? In this house? It was impossible. He followed the sound down the long corridor toward the greenhouse. The closer he got, the clearer the sounds became. the gentle humming, and then again that light, airy sound of a child's laughter. His heart began to pound, a frantic, unfamiliar rhythm. He pushed open the door to the greenhouse. The scene before him was so incongruous, so utterly contrary to the reality he knew, that his mind struggled to process it. The room was a riot of green and color, bathed in the soft light of the setting sun. Elora, the quiet maid, was sitting on the floor, a sketchbook in her lap. And beside her, so close their shoulders were almost touching, sat Lily, his daughter. His silent, broken daughter was holding a piece of charcoal, and on the paper in front of her she had drawn a lopsided, smiling sun. As he watched, Elora pointed to a detail in her own drawing of a bird, and Lily giggled again, the sound pure and bright as a bell. Julian felt the air leave his lungs. He saw Elora's back, her shoulders relaxed, her posture one of easy companionship. He saw his daughter, not vacant, not disconnected, but present, alive, engaged. Her cheeks were flushed with a healthy pink, her eyes sparkled with a light he hadn't seen since she was a toddler. For a moment he was overcome with a feeling so powerful it was physically painful. It was a tidal wave of hope, guilt, and disbelief. But his grief and years of disappointment were a powerful shield. The hope was too terrifying to accept. It was easier to be angry. "What is going on here?" he demanded, his voice harsh, echoing in the suddenly silent space. Elora and Lily both flinched. Lily's giggle died in her throat, and the light in her eyes vanished, replaced by the old familiar fear. She scrambled backward, away from him, her hand immediately going to the wooden horse tucked in her pocket. Elora rose to her feet slowly, placing herself slightly in front of Lily. Her face was calm, but her eyes held a defiant fire Julian had never seen before. "Mr. Croft," she said, her voice quiet but firm, "I was just keeping Lily company." Keeping her company?" he shot back, his voice dripping with sarcasm and suspicion. "Mrs. Gable's instructions, my instructions, were perfectly clear. You are not a nanny. You are not a therapist. You are to perform your duties and leave my daughter to her professional care." His anger was a defense mechanism, a way to control a situation that had suddenly spun far beyond his understanding. He was looking at Elora, but his accusations were really aimed at himself, at the years he had spent entrusting his daughter to strangers while he built an empire. Lily, sensing the threat in her father's voice, did something that shattered Julian's anger into a million pieces. She moved behind Elora, her small hands reaching out and clutching the back of the maid's simple uniform. She peeked around Elora's legs, her eyes wide with fear, fixed on her father. It was a clear, unambiguous act of seeking protection. She had chosen. In this moment of conflict, she had chosen the maid over her own father. The sight broke through Julian's fury like a battering ram. The raw, painful truth of it struck him. This quiet woman had reached his daughter in a way that he, with all his money and all his power, never could. He looked from Lily's terrified face, hiding behind her protector, to Elora's calm, steady gaze. The anger drained out of him, leaving behind a hollow ache of shame. "The specialists said, they said she was unreachable," he stammered, the words sounding feeble and foolish. "The specialists were wrong," Elora said softly, her voice devoid of accusation. It was a simple statement of fact. She didn't move, didn't break her protective stance in front of Lily. Julian stared at them, this strange, silent tableau of the woman he barely knew, and the daughter he was beginning to realize he didn't know at all. The evidence of a miracle was right in front of him, laughing in the face of years of expensive, failed therapies. He had a choice. He could retreat back into his anger and cynicism, fire the maid, and restore the sterile, hopeless order of his life. Or he could take a leap of faith into this terrifying, uncharted territory. He looked at Lily's hand, still clutching Elora's dress, and his choice was made. "Show me," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "Whatever you are doing, show me." It was not an order. It was a plea. A fragile, tentative alliance had just been forged in the wreckage of a father's pride. The alliance was as fragile as a seedling in its first days. Julian's skepticism warred constantly with the undeniable evidence before him. He began to alter his schedule, leaving the office earlier, finding excuses to be home. He would watch from a distance, hidden in the doorway of the corridor, as Alara and Lily spent their afternoons in the greenhouse. He saw Lily begin to use her hands, helping Alara repot small plants, her movements growing more confident. He heard the soft murmur of Alara's voice, not asking questions, but simply describing what she was doing. "We'll give this little fern some water now. See how thirsty its leaves look." And he saw Lily nod. A nod. A simple, responsive gesture that was a seismic event. He granted Alara access to the security camera feeds on his personal tablet, a significant concession of control. He told himself it was for security, to monitor the situation, but he knew it was because he was hungry for more. Late at night, in the lonely quiet of his study, he would watch the footage from the day. He saw Alara and Lily sitting side by side, drawing. He saw Alara teach Lily how to press flowers between the pages of a heavy book. He saw his daughter smile, a real, genuine smile, as a ladybug crawled across her hand. Each small moment was a painful, beautiful revelation. He was witnessing his daughter's reawakening, and he was a stranger to it. This burgeoning hope forced him to confront the past. If the specialists were wrong about Lily, what else had they been wrong about? Alara, sensing his shift in thinking, began to ask gentle, probing questions. "Mrs. Croft loved flowers, didn't she?" she asked one day, gesturing to the reviving greenhouse. "Yes," Julian said, caught off guard. "This was her place. She built it." "What was Lily like before?" Alara's questions were never accusatory. They were like a soft hand, gently turning the pages of a painful book he had tried to keep shut. He found himself talking, first in clipped sentences, then in longer, more reflective passages. He spoke of Lily as a baby, a bright, happy child who had chattered and laughed constantly. He spoke of his wife, Amelia, and the darkness that had crept over her after Lily's birth, a postpartum depression that had been difficult and frightening. Her doctor? Our family doctor. He handled everything, Julian explained, a furrow in his brow. Dr. Finch. He's been with my family for 30 years. He managed Amelia's care, and then, after, he took over Lily's. This was the man who had given him the grim diagnosis, who had recommended the string of therapists, who had overseen the management of Lily's condition. Dr. Alistair Finch, a man Julian had trusted implicitly. Alara listened, her expression thoughtful. "May I see Lily's medical room?" she asked. "I want to understand her routine, the things she's used to." Julian hesitated. That room was a clinical space filled with files and charts and a small locked refrigerator where her special vitamins were kept. It was Dr. Finch's domain, but he looked at Alara, at the quiet determination in her eyes, and nodded. He was starting to trust her intuition more than the decades-long relationship he had with his doctor. He unlocked the door for her. The room was cold and sterile, smelling of antiseptic. Files and binders lined a shelf, a meticulous record of Lily's decline. Alara began to look through them. She wasn't a doctor, but she had a keen eye for detail and a powerful driving instinct that something was fundamentally wrong. She noted the frequency of Dr. Finch's visits, the sheer volume of notes, but the descriptions of Lily's behavior felt generic. They were full of clinical terms but lacked any specific personal observation. They described the child the world saw, not the little girl who was currently learning to press flowers in the greenhouse. Then she noticed an inconsistency. A prescription log for a daily vitamin supplement prescribed by Dr. Finch for nutritional support due to selective eating. Yet in a separate dietary log, it noted Lily had a healthy and varied appetite. It was a small thing, but it snagged in her mind. While Elora reviewed the files, Julian found himself drawn to a place he hadn't entered in 3 years, his late wife's dressing room. It had been sealed, preserved exactly as she had left it. He didn't know what compelled him, but he unlocked the door. The air was thick with the faint scent of her perfume. He ran a hand over a silk scarf, a wave of grief so fresh it staggered him. In the corner sat a large, leather-bound chest. Amelia had called it her treasure box. It contained her journals, old photographs, and personal mementos. He had never been able to bring himself to open it. Now, with a new, urgent need for answers, he found the key and turned the lock. Inside, nestled amongst bundles of letters and photo albums, were several diaries. He opened the most recent one, his hands trembling. Amelia's elegant script filled the pages. He began to read, and the story that unfolded made the blood run cold in his veins. She wrote about the joy of Lily's birth, but also about the crushing weight of her depression. She wrote about Dr. Finch. At first, the entries were grateful. "Alistair is such a comfort," she'd written. But the tone began to change. "Alistair insists I need more medication. I feel so foggy, so disconnected. I told him I wanted to reduce the dosage, but he was very forceful about it." A few weeks later, Lily was fussy today. Alistair gave her a drop of something he called a calming herbal tincture. He said it would help her sleep. "I don't know. It seems wrong to medicate a baby." The final entries were frantic, paranoid. "He's trying to control me. He says Julian is too busy to understand my instability. He wants to manage our finances, set up a trust for Lily under his supervision. He says it's to protect us. I feel trapped. I tried to talk to Julian, but I can't find the words. The medicine makes my head so cloudy." Julian felt sick. He called for Elora, his voice hoarse. She came quickly, her eyes widening at the sight of the open chest and the diary in his hands. He read the passages aloud to her. Her face grew pale. "The vitamins," she whispered, "the ones in the locked refrigerator." Together they went back to the medical room. Julian used a key from his master set to open the small fridge. Inside was a single bottle of amber liquid with a dropper. The label, printed from Dr. Finch's office, read, "Lily Croft, Children's Vitamin and Mineral Complex, 1 full dropper daily." Elora picked up the bottle, her fingers tracing the label. "This isn't right," she said. Julian, now fueled by a cold fury, used a pair of pliers from his desk drawer to pry open a locked file cabinet in the room, one he'd always assumed contained old records. Inside, he found another set of files, older and more detailed. He found the original pharmacy requisitions from 3 years ago. The prescription wasn't for vitamins. It was for a powerful, fast-acting benzodiazepine, a sedative. The dosage prescribed was suitable for an adult, not a small child. The instructions were for daily administration. They stared at each other in horror, the truth laid bare between them. Dr. Finch hadn't been treating Lily. He had been drugging her. For 3 years, he had been systematically sedating a healthy child, inducing the very symptoms he was claiming to treat. The selective mutism, the vacant stare, the emotional disconnect. It was all a chemical prison. Why? The answer was in Amelia's diary: control. He had tried to gain control through Amelia, and when she died suddenly in a car accident, he had shifted his focus to the child. A child diagnosed with a profound permanent disorder with a grieving, overworked father would eventually need a legal guardian to manage her massive inheritance. A guardian like her trusted longtime family doctor. As this monstrous realization settled, Elora's attention was drawn back to the open chest, to a photograph that had fallen out. It was a picture of a teenage Amelia standing on a beach with another, slightly younger girl. They had their arms around each other, laughing into the camera. The younger girl had the same quiet intensity, Ilara carried in her own eyes. Julian picked up the photo. "I've never seen this one before," he murmured. He looked at the vibrant, happy face of his late wife. He noticed a small, distinct mark on her neck, just below her ear, a tiny, crescent-shaped birthmark. His eyes flickered from the photo to Ilara, who was standing beside him, her face etched with sorrow and anger, and then he saw it. In the exact same spot on her neck, peeking out from the collar of her uniform, was an identical crescent-shaped birthmark. The world tilted on its axis. The air grew thick, heavy with the weight of another, even more profound secret. "That mark," he breathed, his finger pointing shakily from the photo to her neck. "It's the same." Ilara met his stunned gaze. The time for secrets was over. "Amelia was my sister," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "My older sister. We were estranged for years after a family argument. I only found out she had died 6 months after it happened. I couldn't believe the official story. I couldn't believe she would leave her child. I came here to find out the truth. I came here for Lily." The maid in his house was not a stranger. She was his daughter's aunt, and she had just uncovered the truth that he had been blind to for 3 entire years. The revelation that Ilara was Amelia's sister recontextualized everything. The instant connection she had with Lily, her fierce protectiveness, her unshakable intuition. It wasn't just the empathy of a kind stranger, it was the pull of blood, an aunt's instinct to save her niece. For Julian, the discovery was both a profound shock and a deep, anchoring relief. He wasn't alone in this nightmare. He had family, a partner he never knew existed. The shared grief for Amelia and the shared fury at Dr. Finch's betrayal bonded them instantly and irrevocably. They spent the rest of the night poring over Amelia's diaries, piecing together the timeline of Dr. Finch's manipulation. It was a chilling story of a predator grooming a vulnerable family, exploiting grief and postpartum depression to weave a web of dependency and control. Their first priority was Lily. "We have to stop the medication immediately," Julian said, his voice a low growl of protective rage. He took the bottle of sedatives and poured the viscous liquid down the sink, the chemical scent filling the sterile medical room. Ilara agreed, but cautioned him. "Julian, her body has been dependent on this for 3 years. We don't know how she'll react. We need to be careful." They decided to handle it themselves, their trust in the medical establishment shattered. The next morning, for the first time in 3 years, Lily did not receive her morning vitamins. The change was almost immediate. By midday, she was not her usual placid, quiet self. A restless energy hummed through her small body. She couldn't seem to sit still, her fingers constantly tapping, her eyes darting around the room as if seeing things for the first time. The world, without its chemical filter, was suddenly too loud, too bright, too much. Ilara stayed by her side constantly, taking her to the quiet sanctuary of the greenhouse. She kept her voice low and soothing, humming her familiar lullaby, trying to provide a single calm anchor in what must have been a terrifying sensory storm for the little girl. Lily was agitated, weepy, and prone to sudden fits of frustration, where she would scribble furiously on her notepad or throw a soft clod of dirt. It was heartbreaking to watch, but it was also a sign of life. The fog was lifting. She was feeling things again, even if those feelings were overwhelming. Julian watched them, his heart aching. He saw the exhaustion on Ilara's face, the infinite patience she showed Lily, and his admiration for her grew into something deeper, something more profound. Their fragile new reality was shattered 2 days later. Dr. Finch was scheduled for his weekly visit. They had briefly considered canceling, but their lawyer, a new one, a shark hired that very morning, advised them to let him come, to not tip their hand. They needed more concrete evidence. The plan was simple: act normal, record the conversation, and get a hair sample from Lily for independent toxicological analysis. Finch arrived exuding his usual air of paternalistic concern, He walked into the living room where Ilara was sitting quietly with Lily. "Good afternoon, Alistair," Julian said, his voice tight but controlled. Dr. Finch smiled, his eyes crinkling. "Julian. And Ilara, is it? Keeping our little Lily company, I see." His gaze fell on Lily. He was a predator sensing a change in his prey. The child wasn't sitting placidly. She was clinging to Ilara's arm, her eyes wide and alert, a flicker of fear in them as she looked at the doctor. The placid emptiness was gone. "She seems a bit agitated today," Finch observed, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. "Has there been any change in her routine?" "No, none at all," Julian lied, his heart hammering against his ribs. The doctor knelt down in front of Lily. "Hello, sweet girl. How are we feeling?" Lily shrank back, burying her face in Ilara's side. This was a dramatic departure from her usual passive unresponsiveness. A flicker of suspicion crossed Finch's face. He reached into his medical bag. "Perhaps she just needs a little boost. Her nerves might be acting up." He started to pull out a small vial and a syringe. The sight of the needle made Julian see red. "That won't be necessary, Alistair," he said, stepping between the doctor and his daughter. "We're trying a new, non-medicinal approach." The mask of concern on Finch's face slipped, revealing the cold, calculating man beneath. He looked from Julian's defiant stance to Ilara's protective embrace of Lily. He saw the open diary on a nearby table. He understood instantly. They knew. "Julian, I must insist," he said, his voice taking on a hard, authoritative edge. "You are overwrought. Grief can impair judgment. Lily's condition is delicate and requires professional management. My management." "Get out of my house," Julian said, his voice dangerously quiet. Finch stood up, his face a mask of cold fury. "You are making a grave mistake," he hissed. "You are an unfit parent, manipulated by a domestic servant. You are endangering your child, and I will not allow it." With that, he turned and stormed out of the house. The threat hung in the air, thick and poisonous. The retaliation was faster and more brutal than they could have imagined. Less than 24 hours later, two people arrived at the door. A stern-faced woman from Child Protective Services and a uniformed police officer. They presented Julian with an emergency court order. Dr. Alistair Finch, as Lily's primary physician for her entire life, had filed a petition alleging child endangerment and medical neglect. He painted Julian as a dangerously unstable guardian under the sway of a manipulative new employee, Ilara, who had convinced him to stop Lily's essential, life-saving medication. The petition cited Lily's current agitated state as proof of the harm they were causing. The order stipulated that Lily was to be removed from the home and placed in temporary foster care pending a full custody hearing, and it included a restraining order against Ilara Vance, barring her from any contact with the child. Chaos erupted. Lily, sensing the panic and seeing the strangers, began to scream, a raw, terrified sound that tore through the house. It was the first time she had made such a loud noise, and it was a sound of pure terror. When the social worker tried to approach her, Lily fought, kicking and crying, clinging to Ilara with desperate strength. "Auntie Ela, no!" she cried out, the words clear and sharp amidst her sobs. It was a moment of perfect, tragic clarity. She was finally speaking, finally naming her protector in the very moment she was being torn away. Julian tried to intervene, to argue, but the court order was ironclad. The officer held him back as the social worker gently but firmly pried Lily's fingers from Ilara's shirt. Ilara stood frozen, tears streaming down her face, her heart shattering as she watched the terrified little girl being carried out of the house, her screams echoing down the marble hallway. "Ela! Ela!" The front door closed, and the house fell into a silence more profound and painful than any that had come before. Lily was gone. The monster had retaliated, using the very system designed to protect children as a weapon to tear their family apart. The silence that descended upon the Croft mansion was no longer one of grief. It was the heavy, suffocating silence of battle. For Julian, the sight of his screaming daughter being carried away was the final brutal catalyst. The passive, grieving billionaire was gone, replaced by a father forged in righteous fury. The cold, calculating mind that had built an empire was now focused on a single objective: to destroy Alistair Finch and bring his daughter home. He unleashed the full, terrifying force of his wealth and influence. The first call was to his new legal team, headed by a woman named Clara Redding, a litigator so famously relentless that her nickname in legal circles was the Shark. He put a private jet at her disposal and gave her a blank check. "I don't care what it costs," he told her, his voice like ice. "I want my daughter back, and I want Finch ruined." Ilara, though devastated and legally barred from the property, became the heart of their war room. Julian set her up in a secure luxury hotel suite nearby, which they quickly converted into a command center. While Julian's team focused on the legal and financial fronts, Ilara provided the crucial human intelligence. She spent hours with a stenographer recounting every detail she could remember from her time in the house, every nuance of Lily's behavior, every inconsistency in the medical files. Her memories, filtered through an aunt's love and a quiet observer's eye, were more valuable than any formal evidence they had so far. She guided them through Amelia's diaries, pointing out passages that corresponded with financial records Julian was now unearthing. They discovered that Finch had been appointed as a trustee for a children's health charity Amelia had founded. Under his management, huge sums of money had been siphoned off into shell corporations, all linked back to Finch. He wasn't just after Lily's inheritance. He had been robbing her mother's legacy for years. The private investigators Julian hired began to dig into Finch's past. They flew across the country, interviewing former colleagues, ex-wives, and disgruntled former patients. A pattern of malpractice, arrogance, and financial desperation emerged. He had been sued twice before for misdiagnosis, settling out of court both times. He had massive gambling debts. The image of the respected family physician crumbled, revealing a desperate con man. The true breakthrough came from a lead Ilara provided. She remembered seeing the name of a private nurse, a woman named Maria, mentioned in Amelia's diary. Amelia had liked her, but noted that Finch had fired her abruptly. "Maria thinks the dosage is too high," Amelia had written. Alistair was furious. She questioned him. It took the investigators 3 days to track Maria down. She was now retired, living in a small town in Oregon. At first, she was terrified to speak, fearing Finch's influence. But Julian flew out personally to meet her. He showed her Amelia's diary. He told her about Lily, and he promised her full legal and financial protection. Looking at the photo of a smiling Amelia and hearing about what had been done to her child, Maria's fear was finally overcome by her conscience. She agreed to sign a sworn affidavit and testify. She told them everything. She confirmed that Finch was systematically over-medicating Amelia, keeping her in a state of confusion and dependency. She had witnessed him preparing Lily's vitamin bottle himself in his office, not from a pharmacy-sealed container, but by mixing drugs from other vials. She had questioned him about it, and he had fired her the next day, threatening to ruin her nursing career if she ever spoke of it. It was the smoking gun they needed. While the legal team prepared for the hearing, Julian received a small, court-approved package. It contained the results of the toxicology report on the hair sample they had managed to get from Lily before she was taken. Clara Redding read the results aloud over the phone, her voice grim. "It's even worse than we thought, Julian. They found consistent, high-level traces of 3 different benzodiazepines. The lab analyst said the levels are so high, it's a miracle the child didn't suffer permanent neurological damage. This isn't just malpractice. It's attempted murder by degrees." The fight was no longer just about custody. It was about putting Alistair Finch in a cage for the rest of his life. The hearing was set for the following week. It would be a showdown for Lily's future and a reckoning for the past. The day of the custody hearing arrived gray and overcast, the weather a perfect reflection of the tension that crackled in the air. The courtroom was a sterile wood-paneled arena where the next chapter of their lives would be decided. Julian and Alara sat side by side at the plaintiff's table with Clara Redding, a united front of grim determination. Across the aisle sat Dr. Alistair Finch, looking composed and confident in a tailored suit, flanked by his own high-priced lawyers. He projected an aura of calm authority, the concerned physician forced to take drastic measures to protect a vulnerable child. The judge, a stern, no-nonsense woman named Judge Carmichael, began the proceedings. Finch's lawyer went first, painting a compelling and damning picture. He presented Finch as a pillar of the community, a doctor who had served the Croft family for decades. He submitted the piles of medical records he had fabricated, showing a child with a severe, degenerative psychological condition. He called the CPS social worker to the stand, who testified that Lily had been in a state of extreme agitation and distress. Clear evidence, the lawyer argued, of the harm caused by the sudden and reckless cessation of her prescribed treatment. He portrayed Julian as a negligent, work-obsessed father, blinded by grief, who had fallen under the spell of a manipulative employee with no medical training. He painted Alara as a grifter, a nobody who had seen an opportunity to ingratiate herself with a wealthy family. For a moment a chilling doubt settled over the courtroom. Finch's narrative, built on years of careful deception, was dangerously plausible. Then it was Clara Redding's turn. "Your Honor," she began, her voice calm and clear, "the defense has presented a compelling work of fiction. We are here today to present the truth." One by one she dismantled Finch's case. She presented the detailed financial records showing his embezzlement from Amelia's charity. She presented the sworn affidavits from his former colleagues about his history of malpractice. She called the toxicologist to the stand, who explained in stark clinical detail the cocktail of powerful sedatives found in Lily's hair, stating unequivocally that such a regimen in a child was unconscionable and amounted to poisoning. Finch's composure began to crack. A tic started in his jaw, and a fine sheen of sweat appeared on his brow. The turning point came when Clara called her next witness, Maria, the retired nurse. Maria walked to the stand, her hands trembling slightly, but her voice was strong as she recounted how Finch had deliberately over-medicated Amelia and mixed the drugs for Lily's vitamins himself. Finch's lawyer tried to discredit her on cross-examination, painting her as a disgruntled former employee, but Maria held firm, her testimony unshakable. The final witness was Alara. She walked to the stand, not as a maid, but as the sister of Amelia Croft and the aunt of Lily Croft. She held up Amelia's diary. "This is my sister's voice," she said, her own voice thick with emotion, a voice that Dr. Finch tried to silence with drugs, just as he tried to silence her daughter. She read the final frantic entries aloud. The courtroom was silent, captivated by the words of a woman speaking from beyond the grave. "Dr. Finch did not care for my sister," Alara concluded, looking directly at the judge. "He preyed on her, and he did not treat my niece. He imprisoned her in a chemical cage so he could one day control her fortune. He didn't count on one thing, that she had family who would not stop until we found the truth." She then turned her gaze to Finch, her eyes blazing with a fire that made him flinch. "You took my sister's light from the world. You tried to steal her daughters. You will not win." It was over. The judge's face was a mask of cold fury. "Dr. Finch," she said, her voice like chipping granite, "in all my years on the bench I have rarely seen a more despicable and predatory abuse of trust." She immediately dismissed Finch's petition and terminated his medical guardianship. She granted full legal custody to Julian Croft, with a special provision adding Elara Vance as a co-guardian, recognizing her crucial role. "As for you, Doctor Finch," she said, gesturing to the bailiffs who were now moving toward him, "I am referring this entire case to the district attorney's office with a recommendation for immediate criminal investigation on charges including, but not limited to, aggravated child abuse, practicing medicine without a license for the drugs he was mixing, and massive financial fraud." Finch's face went ashen as the bailiffs put him in handcuffs. His reign of terror was over. Julian pulled Elara into a fierce hug, a silent acknowledgment of everything they had endured and won. Their victory was absolute, but one final piece was missing. Clara approached them. "Lily is waiting in the chambers with a court-appointed child advocate. She's been asking for you." They were led to a quiet room down the hall. Lily was sitting in a large chair, looking small and lost, clutching her wooden horse. Her eyes were red from crying. The moment the door opened and she saw them, her face crumpled. "Ela!" she cried out, her voice a mixture of relief and anguish. She scrambled off the chair and ran, not to Julian, but straight into Elara's arms. Elara knelt and caught her, holding her tight, burying her face in the child's soft hair, her own tears finally falling freely. "I'm here, my sweet girl," she whispered. "I'm here. I'm never leaving you again." Julian knelt beside them, placing a hand on his daughter's back. Lily looked up, her tear-filled eyes moving from Elara to him. She reached out a small hand and placed it on his. It was a gesture of forgiveness, of acceptance. In the quiet, sterile hallway of the courthouse, their family, broken and scattered by lies, was finally truly reunited and made whole. 1 year later, the Croft mansion was unrecognizable. The heavy damask curtains had been replaced with light, airy linen that allowed sunlight to flood the once gloomy rooms. The oppressive silence was gone, replaced by the sound of music, of laughter, and the happy, chattering voice of a 7-year-old girl. The sterile formality had given way to a warm, lived-in chaos. Toys were scattered in the living room. Lily's colorful drawings were taped to the enormous stainless steel refrigerator, and the whole house smelled of fresh flowers from the now thriving greenhouse. Alistair Finch had been convicted on multiple felony counts and was serving a lengthy prison sentence, his name and reputation erased from the city's elite circles. His downfall had been swift and total. The occasion for the laughter was a garden party. It wasn't a stuffy, high-society gala, but a vibrant celebration for the official relaunch of the Amelia Croft Foundation for Children's Health. Elara, now the foundation's director, had refocused its mission to advocate for patients' rights and expose medical malpractice. She stood on a small dais, addressing the crowd of supporters, doctors, and families the foundation had already helped. She spoke with a quiet confidence that captivated the audience, her past as an unassuming housekeeper seeming like a story from another life. Lily stood beside her, holding her hand, no longer a silent ghost, but a bright, happy child. She was enrolled in a special school for gifted children where she was excelling, her 3 years of silence having given her a unique, profound power of observation. She still loved to draw, but now she also loved to talk, to ask questions, to tell stories. Julian watched from the edge of the crowd, a gentle smile on his face. He was a changed man. The ruthless, work-obsessed Titan had been replaced by a present, engaged father. He had restructured his company, delegating massive amounts of responsibility to spend his afternoons and weekends with Lily. He had learned to listen, not just to words, but to the quiet language of the heart. He had learned to be a parent. His relationship with Elara had blossomed from a partnership of necessity into a deep, quiet love built on a foundation of shared loss and shared victory. They were a family forged in crisis, their bond stronger than any conventional romance. After Elara's speech, as guests mingled on the lawn, Julian walked over to her and Lily. He gently put his arm around Alara's shoulders. "She would be so proud of you," he said softly, his gaze sweeping from Alara to Lily, who was now chasing a butterfly across the grass. "Of what you've built, of who you've become." Alara leaned her head against his shoulder. "She'd be proud of you too, Julian." "Look at her," she said, her voice full of wonder as they watched Lily laugh, her face turned up to the sun. "She's so full of light." The wooden horse was nowhere in sight. It had been retired to a place of honor on Lily's bookshelf some months ago, its duty as a shield no longer needed. Later that evening, after the last guests had departed, the three of them sat on a bench in the greenhouse, now a lush, tropical paradise. Lily was nestled between them, sleepy and content, recounting a story from her day at school. The setting sun cast a warm, golden glow through the glass panes. This was their sanctuary, the place where their healing had begun, where a whispered word and a shared silence had changed everything. It was a testament to the fact that true wealth isn't measured in stock portfolios or sprawling estates, but in the fierce, unyielding love that can coax life back into bloom even after the harshest winter. In the end, it is not power or money that heals the deepest wounds, but the quiet courage to listen, to trust, and to fight for the family you have found. Before we say goodbye, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and like the video. Oh, and don't forget to comment below where you're watching us from. We love to know that.